Hey guys, my name is Ian. I'm with Nolo Designs, and today I'm really super excited to be able to talk to David from Dobinson. As you guys know, we've been working on getting some aftermarket suspension together for the Ridgeline specifically, and today I have David from Dobinson here to discuss that. But first, we're going to talk about a little history of Dobinson, some reasons why I personally believe that they're going to be a great company for us to work with to make these parts. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to David, let him introduce himself, and then we'll go through some of the things for where Dobinson came from.
Thank you, Ian. My name is David Otero. I'm the manager at Dobinsons USA. I've been with the company, working with the family since 2010. I opened up the hub in Panama for Latin America, and then I opened up the hub here for Canada, US, and the Caribbean. So I've been working with the family for a very, very long time. I basically run the stuff, here, basically on this side. And, I have good connections and good relationships with the Dobinsons family.
That's really cool to see that Dobinson themselves is a family company. I was looking at some of the stuff David and I spoke briefly before this and talked about some of the history of the company, and some of the stuff that you sent over. I didn't realize that they've been around since the 50s and they got their start in rail. I think that's super cool.
Yeah. So I'll start off with a little bit of history on them. The company was started by Reg Dobinson in 1953. He was a blacksmith, basically working for the railway, and he wanted to venture on his own. He started doing it on the weekends, and then later on went to full time of repairing springs and whatnot. And as the company started growing, his two sons, Glenn and Keith, then came onto the company, I believe in their 20s, and they started ramping up the leaf spring manufacturing. So before Reg was kind of like repairing spring, and then now with the kids started working with him in the 70s, they started manufacturing leaf springs. That was a pivotal point for the company because that's when Reg Dobinson designed and patented the eye roller. So basically what rolls the eye of the leaf spring. So that kind of was like a big breakthrough for the company, and it helped the company grow. And even that time, that's when they started making some noise in Australia and started kind of selling leaf springs, nationwide for them.
Okay.
Then you go into the 80s, and this is the 80s when, before there was internet, they had to go to the post office, find phone books, and start calling other countries to see who would want to buy or order some leaf springs made by them. And that's when they started venturing outside of Australia and started to open up their exports. Then we have the 90s. The 90s is when coil spring manufacturing was booming, and that's what they got into, the coil spring manufacturing. That's when they started adding coil springs to their catalogs. That's when they started, manufacturing both leaf springs and coil springs under the company. And Glenn and Keith, his two sons, had a big part in that. They were, basically taking that on full force, and they were kind of pushing for that. As suspensions start to innovate, new vehicles start to come out and stuff like that. And then later in the 2000s, then Glenn and Keith's sons or kids started working for the company. So this is a family operated company, family owned. They just continue expanding as they continue having kids, and yeah, it just basically continues adding to the workforce and growing the company. Around that time in the 90s, that's when they started developing shock absorbers. So, continuing with the leaf spring and the coil spring, that now they were working in their ways into shock absorbers, and they started, offering the twin tube shock technology, which is like an OEM replacement, but better performance. And that's when they started, selling the shock absorbers. Now having a much bigger catalog, much more applications, the company wanted to venture even more to export. They were already selling really well in Australia, but they wanted to export around the world. And Glenn would take trips, whether it's Asia, Europe, even the Americas. He would take trips and start visiting, well-respected, stores around in different countries. And, they started selling more and more Dobinsons worldwide, and that just continued the growth of the company. Now, closer to 2010, that's when you see more development of the monotube shock range, from the first generation MRR or the IMS. The monotube shock range, they're fully rebuildable, retunable shocks. They're coming more from that race technology, which I'll go into depth with the differences. but that just kind of started growing more and more the company as far as the shock range goes. And you fast forward to now, Dobinsons is known worldwide. We have not only their own stores, but they have dealers that they've been working for over 10 years in different parts of the world, and just growing the brand, you know, and just basically making a name for itself. So apart from private labeling, Dobinsons as a brand has grown very much so.
Yeah. I think that's super cool to see that it's just a family company and that they keep reinvesting in in the suspension market space and continue to seek out opportunity and find ways to innovate and things like that. And I think it's really cool that they've brought in the opportunity to do some private labeling and such, which is what I'm working on doing here with you guys. And I think that's going to be really cool because it just creates a lot of there's need in the market for it, and it's awesome to be able to partner with people that have a true foundation and background. I myself is just a small operation with myself, and we have like one other guy, so it's cool to be the small operation working with another family company is really cool. So looking forward to being able to continue to do that. We'll move on to our next thing on the list. So that's the history of Dobinson for you guys who didn't know. I didn't know it until I talked to David about it, and it's really cool to see and hear. And we're going to go ahead and move on to just a little bit about shocks, why they matter, and things that you guys probably may know if you've dug through the internet a whole bunch, but it's always good to have a refresher, and I figured nobody better to do it than David himself here.
Yeah, so suspension has grown and developed throughout the years. You start off with leaf sprung vehicles and coil sprung, and now IFS, and it just keeps changing and innovating, right? But basically, the suspension starts with a coil spring, and the coil spring is there to hold the weight of the vehicle. Coil spring will give you the lift height ultimately. But if you have a vehicle with just coil springs, and let's say you dismount the shock or you have a bad shock, you'll notice that the vehicle bounces a lot and it's uncontrollable, kind of like a pogo stick. The shock absorber's job is to do that, to basically control, the compression and the rebound, and mostly due to the spring, because the spring will hold the vehicle, its weight, but also release stored energy as it expands, right, after it's been compressed. So once you have a coil spring and a shock together, they're both doing a great job together as a duo to absorb the bumps and whatnot. But the coils is what supports the weight, and but at the same time it releases energy, which is where the shock comes into play. And that's why you'll see, like in the early days, if you look at shock absorbers, they only had rebound dampening. They didn't even have compression dampening. And you fast forward to now, and now you have the opposite. Now you have a lot of companies going to softer coils, but having more dampening forces input into the shock absorbers, because they want the shock absorber to do more work now. So like I said, technology is still advancing and changing, but the baseline is that coil springs are there to support the weight of the vehicle, to basically give you the lift height, and the shocks are basically to control everything. You want the vehicle to dampen the bumps, but at the same time maintain control and keep the vehicle as straight and smooth as possible. And that's when you ramp up the dampening forces, but there's that fine line where you don't want to over ramp and make the ride harsh. So that's the key right there, and that's what makes R&D and everything crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have it where if you don't have enough damping, then you're going to end up with bouncing down the road, or you're going to have the tires skipping off of everything, or bumps and things like that. Just acquiring my 2-year-old. So either way, though, as you see, small family company, little places, the warehouse is significantly cooler than my home. So definitely made the choice to go from here. But yeah, I think that's some of the stuff that, a lot of times you'll see some offerings on the market will come and they're like, man, we've got all this adjustment, or we've got all this. And I really think a lot of times what happens is customers get themselves tuned off into a kind of a corner, or they're like, man, this doesn't work well because of it's so harsh, or maybe it's, and so you end up, maybe hating what you purchased just because it's not set up right for the vehicle, or you accidentally tuned it into a corner. Where that's what I think is nice about doing the amount of testing and running stuff on the dyno and making sure that, ultimately you're tuned into this little window of where you want to operate, and it's going to work well in a lot of situations.
That's right.
Yeah, definitely. So if you could, I'd like to talk a little bit about just kind of specifically what we're working on. So the stuff that you guys are making for us, as far as those things are concerned, and then maybe move over into some of like the quality and reliability, and we can talk more about testing anywhere in there that makes sense too.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the Ridgeline, right? The Ridgeline is a vehicle that, like as I mentioned before, like suspension is technology and design is advancing. They have created more of an independent suspension system where it provides comfort, provides control, provides many pros. But the con with the Ridgeline per se is that you don't have much travel. And that's where our limitations are at. So this is where R&D is very, very important, because it's not about just putting a shock that's a certain length or whatnot. You don't want to break your brake lines at full droop. You don't want to sacrifice your CV angles. There's just so many things that are limiting the suspension as far as travel and droop goes. But that doesn't mean that you can't design something for it. So that's where we come into play. That's where we're listening to you. And this is where we're taking that task where we want to create something that will ride better, but also provide lift and more travel than the current suspension from OEM.
Yeah, that's going to be, I don't know. I'm excited about it. I know there's a number of people that are excited about it. So I'm just really looking forward to being able to do that. And I think that's really true with the platform as a whole. I think, a lot of people will knock it because it is a four-wheel independent suspension platform. And so you definitely have limitations, but it, as a whole, it rides so much better. It controls so much better on washboard. It really does a great job. It's a really good all around. And I think if you can get, like we're talking about here, giving it more travel and still trying to stay within the bounds of your factory vehicle, I think it's a great kind of launch starting point for making the platform even better than it is already. And it gives you a lot more opportunity for, things in the future to come from it. So that's going to be really cool to see. And I'm looking forward to being able to get them bolted up to my truck to do a little testing personally.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the last thing I really wanted to go over was just some of the stuff for quality and the pre-testings and things like that you guys do, just to make sure that the products that are coming out and the stuff you guys are going to be able to buy is going to be very well tested and vetted long before you guys will even see it. And so it's just some of the things that make Dobinson unique from a reliability standpoint, and reasons why I think you guys are good at this, and that's why I'm here talking to you guys, and that's why we're working together to make this happen. But just to explain to the people, out there why does Dobinson have that good reliability and so on.
Yeah, so quality is very important for us. Not only it's our our baseline. It's the most important thing that we hold with R&D. We come from an OEM background, so we know OEM products they're good as far as longevity goes, and their quality is good, and they tend to ride pretty good, as newer vehicles tend to come out. So we kind of use like the OEM stuff as a baseline, but we want to make it even better, right? We want, like I said earlier, we want to lift the vehicle, increase what travel we can still get out of it, and all at the same time control that weight, but still not compromise on ride quality. So OEM is definitely our baseline, our background, and OEM already comes with longevity and quality in mind. So, like for example, rubber bushings. We're one of the few companies that love to use rubber bushings versus spherical bearings or poly bushings. Rubber bushings last a long time. They don't require maintenance. You don't have to change them out. You don't have to grease them. It seems like a no-brainer for this type of application. If you're making something for a race vehicle, then we go to spherical bearings because you need something that's free pivoting. So, just the bushings alone, that's something that we take very critical, and we want to make sure that it comes from that OEM baseline. The same with seals. We want a seal that works well, that doesn't require constant rebuild, times and gives you the same longevity you find in the OEM suspension. So having an OEM background and baseline, I think already gives you that assurance that what you found with the OEM suspension, we will only take that and make it better. There's a lot of companies, especially US shock companies, where their forte is race vehicles. So they grab whatever off the shelf body, rod, or shaft seals, and they just kind of put it together to make it work. They even put spacers internally to limit the extension instead of making a proper rod length. And they do this because they want to make something work, which is fine. But we take the longer approach, kind of like OEM. If we have to
Yep.
pay two, we have to order 5,000 shaft of a certain length, or we have to order 2,000 bodies of a certain length to make it as perfect and as designed as we can. That's what we'll do. If you compare our shocks to other manufacturers, we're always going to have the shortest compressed length, and that's very difficult to achieve. And that just kind of proves that we kind of go with a new tooling, a new part number versus kind of using what we already have available to make it work.
Yeah.
So, and then it's something that you have to take into account. Apart from the seals, going back to the seals, we work with NOK in Japan, and NOK is a big seal supplier around the world. We love their seals. Their quality is amazing, but they have a big catalog, and a lot of companies, they grab whatever is available, so it cuts down on time. Our
Sure.
our R&D time takes longer because we try to tell them what we want to do, and what is it that what needs to meet our criteria, and they have to create a new seal for us. We then hold that part number, we pay them their tooling fee, and that becomes a specific seal for that shock part number. So all this just starts to add more and more time for R&D. And people ask us, why do we take so long? Is because we have a process.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from COVID times, I've seen even Toyota or big companies like Yamaha engines, where you could fault that lack of supply of products or the lack of workforce, but I feel a lot of things were rushed out. There was a
Mm.
lot of coming out, new applications, new things. Technology was still advancing during the COVID times, so companies were trying to catch up. But we hold a process, and we want to stick to that process. And if it takes a certain amount of time, we will take that long of time. Or
Yep.
if we have to continue postponing, we will postpone. We don't like to rush things out because, you know, you don't want to have a recall as a manufacturer, or you don't
No.
want to have to go back because you have to change something. And we've already seen that since COVID. We've seen that with prominent companies. So, it's something that we take, very serious.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes Dobinson unique in the regard of, because it is a smaller family company, you are able to have the freedom to hold process. And so, like, I have come from an engineering background myself, and so process is like king. Like, if you can get a well dialed process and stick to it, you're going to get the best stuff every single time. And
Yeah.
that's huge. That makes a massive difference when you're looking for the longevity of your suspension and your componentry and the whole thing as a system to work well together. So that's massive. And I think something that you mentioned about having the shortest compressed length of a
Mhm.
lot of the competition that's out there. That was something that, even when you and I talking about the additional shaft travel of the strut, but yet maintaining the factory compressed length. And I thought I was like, I don't know what kind of magic is in there, but for that to
Yeah.
happen. But I was like, that's really cool to see that that's still like, that's just how you guys operate. This is
Yeah.
what you do.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't think I have anything else. Do you have anything about testing we could talk about? We talked about product and some of the quality aspects and things like that. And then let's just talk a little bit about testing here, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so the first stage is getting measurements off an OEM vehicle. And that way we know our limitations. We always want to make sure that the first samples don't create problems at full droop, or the body size binds with something. So the first stage is the measurements, and the measurements have to be very, very good, because if we have an issue with the sample, we'll notice right away where there was something that was measured incorrectly. Then we go to the second stage, which is, ride quality. So the first set of samples are always going to have our preferred valve forces. compared to the OEM.
Yeah.
But we are going to rely on your feedback to tell us, listen, you know, I've driven the OEM suspension, I've driven the OEM suspension with spacers, and I've driven your samples. This is where I'm seeing where I'm not too happy with, or this is where I do see an improvement. And
Yeah.
most of the time we hit it with the first set of samples. Sometimes we have to go back and make changes, small changes, not big changes.
Sure.
And you know, that's where we continue working at it instead of kind of like rushing it out and being like, look, we spent 2 3 years on this, we got to turn over some money because we've already invested so much in tooling and time. We got to roll out the first batch and then we'll improve the second batch. We don't do that. Like, we will try to perfect the first batch before it goes into mass production. I
Sure.
personally have a 2022 Tundra, and I've had the vehicle for 2.5 years, and I still play around with tuning the shocks. I know we're happy with what we're selling right now for the product, but I always try to improve it. You know, not only being my personal vehicle, it's just because, you know, I'm pretty big in that market of the new third gen Tundras. I want to make sure that everybody speaks very good about Dobinsons, and any little feedback, I take that, you know, very serious. So if I can always try to make it even better, we will take the time to continue perfecting the product.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really that's the goal, even for me on my side. You know, it's like, the way I look at this is kind of this is the beginning of this relationship and what kind of products that we can work together to create. And so it's like, you know, as the market continues to show adoption and we continue to work together on things, I think it'll be cool to be able to try to work on other stuff maybe in the future. And you know, I think just continuous improvement is always required, because there's weird use cases and side, you know, pockets of how someone may use something that doesn't happen every day, may not happen every 6 months, you know. And so it's like, well, now I've got 1,500 pound. Like, for me personally on my truck, I know one of the things I'm looking forward to with the samples is that I will have I very often will have, you know, 1,200 pounds in the bed of my truck, but I'm hauling it down the highway, and then I'll take it out and go, you know, do something else with it. And then the next weekend we're loaded up and we're going to go run some local trails down in like West Virginia. And so it's really pulling double duty. And so I think that's one of the things that's going to be great to test, and hopefully, you know, we can really knock it out of the park there. So
Yeah, for sure.
for sure. But all right, well, hey David, thank you for your time. Thank you for going through everything with me here. I think hopefully people got some benefit out of it. And yeah, just continue to keep working together, and I'll keep you guys updated as I get parts. You'll get to see them pop up on Instagram or on YouTube as well. So with that, yeah, thank you for your time, David. You have a great day, sir, and we'll see you guys.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.